So I'm really excited to introduce Jimenez, who's our last lecturer of the season. We have a bunch of students online as well as here, so I know the semester's winding down, but it's really great to see all of you, including some of our alumni all the way back. So Jimenez Lai, who is a local architect who lives very close to the campus. He's the founder and leader of a firm called Bureau Spectacular. And if you haven't been on his website, I encourage you all to go and enjoy. This design studio he founded in 2008. And Jimenez creates, draws, and builds exquisite, exuberant, surrealistic, imaginative, and always joyful architecture. So you can see why I love this work so much. Some of his built structures include an installation at the Venice Architecture Biennale and a 52-foot object at the Coachella Valley Music Festival a few years ago. And unsurprisingly, his works are in the permanent collections of the Museum of Modern Art in New York, San Francisco MoMA Art Institute of Chicago, as well as our very own LACMA. He was born in Taiwan, came of age in Canada, and lives not far away here in Los Angeles. Before establishing Bureau Spectacular, he lived in a desert shelter at Taliesin. You know, Taliesin was the school that was built and designed and founded by Frank Lloyd Wright, and resided in a shipping container at Atelier van Lieshout on the piers of Rotterdam in Holland, in the Netherlands. Before founding his firm, he worked for various international offices, including OMA, which is the Remco Haas Office of Metropolitan Architecture. His first book, Citizens of No Place, an architectural graphic novel, was published by Princeton Architectural Press with a grant from the Graham Foundation. Draft 2 of his book, and I just have to say this because I love it so much, has been archived at the New Museum as a part of the show Younger Than Jesus. Lai has won various awards, including the Architecture League Prize for Young Architects, the Debut Award at the Lisbon Triennale, and the Designer of the Future at Art Basel. He currently teaches at USC, was formerly at UCLA, and we're super excited to have him come speak to us. So thank you.
Can you all hear me all the way in the back? Is this audible? Okay, great, thank you. And thank you, Ingela, for the wonderful presentation. So nice to be here. Morgan and I also go way back. He just reminded me that nearly 20 years ago, I think I owe this connection so much because nearly 20 years ago, when I was really just a student, like a nobody, you know, he and Mason White somehow decided to feature my work on ArchConnect. And, you know, let's just say it was an enormous boost at the time for me to be able to go further. So I'm taking this opportunity to thank you publicly. Thank you.
Thank you.
And it's always been a joy to be around former ELAC students. Over the years, I've encountered many former ELAC students, including 2 back there. I have 2 students there right now, Alex and Dunia, who decided, thank you for coming. We're going to studio afterwards at USC. But over the years, you know, having taught at UCLA, I think the transfer program has been thriving for many years, and so I've also enjoyed meeting former. I mean, it's a wonderful program. I think, you know, you guys are in good hands. I've consistently encountered talented people out of this program, so this is great. Today's talk. Let me just see. I will break this talk now into a few segments. This is the website that Ingela was talking about. It's pretty recently restructured. If you don't have a website, I highly encourage you to just go through the trouble of doing it. I really underestimated the psychological factor of not having a website. And now that I have it again, it's been very helpful. So this is roughly the structure of how I'll be talking about how I'll be talking today. I'll start with an introduction about who I am, what some of the highlights of things I've done. I'll transition into talking about spaceships and gravity. This is followed by posture is a structural problem. Third, a segment called the facts of fiction. Finally, I'll talk a bit more about some other current projects. and I'll do an outro. By the time I get to the facts of fiction or other current projects, depending on how we're feeling and how we're doing on time, I may begin to skip slides where I'm not talking about the work, and I'll just let's say forewarn everybody that this might be happening. I've drawn a lot of comics over my career, and I think if you were to think about, if I were to describe a fork in the road in my approach to work, I would say on the one hand, there's cartoons about architecture, where the medium is comic books or cartoons, right? The medium is cartoon, but the subject matter is architecture, okay? But the other side of the fork of the road here is cartoonish architecture, where I'm using architectural medium, right? I'm here, for example, this is a 0-degree axon that I drew by hand, but the sensibility is cartoonish. Once again, the medium here is cartoon, the subject matter is architecture. And here, the medium is architecture, but the sensibility is cartoonish, right? So from this, this is a really good way to maybe see the rest of what I'm about to talk about, because in talking about a bunch of the built work, I'll also interlace it with stories that would feel a lot like comics or even science fiction or political fiction. Okay, and as a process of writing a lot, writing text and image compositions, I've also been involved in a lot of publications over the years. This, for example, was a publication series that I organized with the Grand Foundation called Treatise. And as Ingelo mentioned earlier, I've also been super fortunate over the years that I've been able to do so many exciting things. For example, I got to represent Taiwan at the Venice Biennale. This was some years ago. I had some projects collected by major museums. In this case, the lamp scribble was collected by LACMA. By the way, this might be a good kind of side note to mention. Why would an architect be thinking about lamps, right? I believe the range of things that we think about when we're trained as architects ranges from spoons to cities. From spoons to cities, right? We design things as small as spoons. It's very common for people to design chairs, like architects designing chairs, or in this case, the proverbial spoon is a lamp, right? Scribble in this case. I've also, again, very fortunate that I've been able to be part of the MoMA PS1 competition series. I've designed a bunch of houses that didn't get built over the years. For example, this here is called the pool house, which really heavily influenced the MoMA PS1 competition. Just also on a side note, if you have a chance to search this project, which is the Pool Party by Bureau Spectacular, our entry to the MoMA PS1, I would say the lasting medium for this project has turned into a YouTube video, which is on YouTube, and you can find it. But despite having designed buildings that didn't get built or having drawings collected by museums, I think what's consistent is that while I'm no longer younger than Jesus, I think it's nice to every now and then think about the full spectrum of biographies that you tend to read about architects, right? And this on-ramp may last a very long time, as I'm experiencing, this very long on-ramp. But then lucky for me, I've been able to use this process of a very long on-ramp to think about what does it mean to cartoonishly think of the section as a cartoon page, for example, right? If the speech bubbles are additional spaces that you can add onto typical plans, or in the case here, if the plan urbanistically, we're able to think about the densities and the gaps that we may learn graphically from comics, right? I think this later you'll see some examples of cartoons that emerge either as a medium or as a sensibility. I'm also thinking a lot these days about things like this. For example, if you search the internet, if you just typed in metaverse on the internet, somehow very consistently stuff like this shows up, right? This gradient of magenta to cyan, this kind of like infinite depth of a grid that suggests to kind of run to infinity. And I'm just thinking, what is this consistent aesthetics of the metaverse that shows up time and again? Is this a form of nostalgia where, those of us who have been alive long enough to remember the neons of the 1980s. And if this is a form of nostalgia, what sets this apart from ways in which we may think about the relationship between modernism and postmodernism, or what postmodernism is to whatever today is, right? I've been very fortunate to also have encountered a contemporary philosopher from the Netherlands who writes about this stuff. His name is Timotheus Vermeulen, and I'll also talk a bit more about him towards the end, right? This is not me. This is from Timotheus Vermeulen and Robin van den Akker, two Dutch philosophers. They've been thinking a lot about just because some form of referentiality has reemerged today doesn't mean that we're back to postmodernism. Their answer is no, we're not. We're in the middle of something else. We've been in the middle of something else. And this the difference between a postmodern referentiality to today's referentiality is the role of irony, right? Whereas the function of irony as a literally and rhetorical device back in postmodernism was to subvert the singular mindedness of modernism of the single grand narrative. Today, it's more of an odd oscillation between irony and sincerity. And I don't have the entire time to talk about it today, but I highly encourage those of you, if you're interested in this subject matter, they do a really good job writing about it. Other things I'm working on today as a way to maybe finish the introduction, I'm thinking a lot about monsters, okay? I'm thinking a lot about monsters. What kind of monsters? The kind of monster that represents maybe the edge of normalcy, right? I believe the function of monsters throughout every single form of mythology is to galvanize people from acting abnormally, right? To do something abnormal, it could be painted as a monster. And what are some of the graphic, visual, and constructive representations of monstrosity? And what is that today? And what is the distinction between a monster versus a character or a creature in architecture, right? I'll also say more about that when I get to the second portion, which is about how posture is a structural problem. All right, as I promised, I'm gonna get into it. This is the first segment, spaceships and gravity. I'm not showing any of my work from when I was a student, right? But I can verbally say something about my thesis project when I was a student, which was a work of science fiction about teleportation. What happens when transitional spaces is entirely eliminated and everything is destination. And meaning I had a propensity, I still do have a propensity towards notions of science fiction. This year, we were working with the DC BID, the Business Improvement District of downtown Los Angeles. We actually, it always shocks me that we got paid to do this. They were asking us around the time of COVID, to help them reimagine downtown Los Angeles. What does it mean to do a kind of urban analysis, an unexpected urban analysis of downtown Los Angeles, right? So within this process, we wrote 10 short stories about downtown Los Angeles. And in this one, which I'll come back to much later, in this one, for example, we were thinking about the wealth gap, the very, very literal wealth gap in downtown Los Angeles, where people are living on the streets versus the people who are able to access the roof, maybe penthouses or bars or social clubs all the way up top, where it is financially inaccessible, right? And so if we were to not design anything, but simply turn off the middle of the building, we're struck with this image where downtown Los Angeles is but a fleet of antisocial spaceships that really accentuate this wealth gap, right? The obsession with spaceship that I have really came from my time at Taliesin. Lucky when I was younger, when I was a graduate student, I had a scholarship to study Frank Lloyd Wright, and I used that scholarship to enroll in Taliesin, Wisconsin, and Taliesin West. And also very lucky for me, I physically encountered this model, right? For those of you who are not familiar with this model, this is the Broadacre City from Frank Lloyd Wright's proposal. Frank Lloyd Wright, at this time in the early 20th century, had grown weary of the density and, let's say, filth of high-density cities like New York, right? At the time, I guess, we as in humans weren't doing as good of a job at preventing disease and waste management. So Frank Lloyd's idea is that the vast resource that the United States has is land. Let's do a proposal. He wrote this, let's say, utopian proposal titled the Broadacre City, where every family unit would own 1 acre, and they would be responsible for their own agrarian production to sustain themselves, right? Again, this vision of every family an acre, as the first time I drove through the United States from Toronto, I think I saw the vision come to life in the form of suburbia. I believe that Frank Lloyd's vision of Broadacre City totally came true in the form of suburbia. What Frank Lloyd Wright did not calculate, though, is that land is not infinite, even in the United States, right? This expansive model, at the time, I was really thinking cannot be possibly sustainable. Not possible in my mind, right? You have to pardon the resolution here because I would have been maybe 22 or 23 at the time doing this, and Rhino was very finicky at the time. I thought, what if I were to package the Broadacre City as a spaceship, shoot it into space? Inside the envelope of the spaceship, the Broadacre City will never be expandable anymore. It will become a city inside of a building that is traveling near the speed of light in search of another planet, right? And if you're really living life inside of this spaceship, Orhan would be familiar with these graphics because this is the thing that he helped publish. He published on ArcConnect way back when. If I were to take this story seriously of people living inside of the Broadacre City spaceship, what's the routine like? Who governs it? What's the political system? How do you get food? And most of all, what's gravity like when there's no gravity, right? Like, does that mean that every plan, elevation, ceiling plan, every surface becomes occupiable? In other words, every orthographic drawing becomes planned, right? And additionally, what's sustainability like when you have to think about the kind of like constant cycling of human waste and the constant reconsumption of human waste, right? Lucky for me, back then at Taliesin, the whole idea of Taliesin is that you do get to build something one-to-one, right? And this was at a time when I was not very familiar with power tools and such. I was, very fortunate to have met this carpenter who taught me a thing or two, and I got to construct one of these spaceship pods, okay? And inside of one of these spaceship pods, as I mentioned, plan equals elevation equals ceiling plan, right? If I only had the means to rotate this thing, every surface would be occupiable and ergonomically meaningful as a plan. Around 2008, a few years after Taliesin, right, and also a few years after graduation, after working in the Netherlands, I started my teaching career around 2007. And I saw on the internet there was a call for entry, a competition, right, at a gallery in Los Angeles called Materials and Applications. And the call for the submission at the time was gravity defiance. I wrote this proposal where if we can just rotate a room where we seize the delineation between plan, section, elevation, because all of them will defy the designation by gravity, right? If only we can rotate them, right? And so we did pull off back in 2008 this room that rotates once an hour. As some of you veterans may recognize some faces over here. Very sad, he's gone. Yeah, great mind, Oliver, Hess, and Jenna at the time they were running it. So this room rotates once an hour, meaning every 15 minutes, one of the surfaces will become parallel with the ground. Every 15 minutes, a plan got to become an elevation, got to become a ceiling plan, and every 7.5 minutes, you get to experience life on the oblique. This obsession with spaceships, also extended into what happens if you, let's say, return to Earth, right? So here you can follow this person who has arrived back on Earth, encounters this strange creature who says, "Come walk with me to this coordinate where your home used to be." this man is very stressed out because, he's still paying his mortgage and he's asking, what happened to my house? What do you mean we used to be, right? And the creature says, well, you space warped and you've been gone for 10,000 years. Your culture no longer exists. So this creature over here is in fact a future human who's an anthropologist, right? And he says, the focus of my anthropological thesis is the average taste of the early 21st century. Average taste of the early 21st century. So here are some of the hallmarks of average taste in the early 21st century. And this future archaeologist, anthropologist says, I have so many questions for you. It's not every day you meet a live specimen from 10,000 years ago, right? I have so many questions for you. First question, was architecture this or that? Because from all the academic records, architecture appears to be about this. However, from almost every archaeological dig, architecture seems to be about that. There seems to be a disconnect between what is being discussed academically versus what is being built physically. So he said, this future archaeologist, just to conclude my first question, can you tell me what may have caused this divergence? This man says, oh, everyone's dead. I guess I don't have to pay my taxes anymore. Should have redeemed my Costco points. But this, the outcome of the story, many years after completing the story, writing about space warp and spaceships, and obviously, for those of you who are familiar with the 1968 Planet of the Apes, here Charlton Heston is in the foreground because he realized that he had also liked the story Space Warp Far into the Future, and the way in which he recognized that this is far into the future is the submersion of the Statue of Liberty, right? To perform archaeology is to excavate Earth out of the ground, right? This downward vector of digging is let's say, relationship with time, downwards, right? If left undisturbed, every year, I guess a few millimeter, eventually a few centimeters of dust that turns into Earth and eventually turns into layers of Earth, right? For instance, the Forum in Rome is roughly 6 meters underground, right? That's 2,000 years, roughly 6 meters. In 2019, we were approached by the Museum of Modern and Contemporary Art in Seoul, Korea. They had this project because they wanted to commemorate the death of the last king of Korea, who had died 100 years prior in 1919. He had passed away in 1919. This last king of Korea had a vision that one day Seoul may become a cosmopolitan exchange of ideas where artists may unite and from international settings to construct things on his palace. So they really made it happen. They negotiated with the palace, which is still a palace you can visit, called Deoksugon in Seoul. And the structures are still there. So the Museum of Modern and Contemporary Art selected a few artists to come and construct installations around the final home of the last king of Korea, right? And I was really thinking, what if we were to reverse this relationship to on Earth is to excavate time, but if we were to identify a future datum, let's say 2,000 years into the future or 6 meters above ground, may we, assuming that the last king of Korea's palace would be an archaeologically space of interest, maybe we were be able to stand on this plateau of a future archaeologist and look down on a transparent version of their point of view into our current society, right? And this idea of excavating 2,000 years into the past or 2,000 years into the future, meaning the current moment is a mirroring plane of archaeology or future archaeology. All right, I'm moving into the second segment, which is posture is a structural problem, okay? I have to first return to the spaceship a little bit to talk about, let's say, one's relationship propensity for either sections or elevations versus plan, right? Let's say plan versus section. So here you can see two people training in the gravity room inside the Broadacre City spaceship. And character number one says, I love sections because you can see what you want to see. It's like cloud watching. You can imagine anything. But the second character says, no, he turns gravity back on and he proclaims that no, plans are better because you get to evaluate anything objectively. You get to think about spatial conditions. You get to plan, also almost like map people's activities. The plans are better. This is sort of a classic case in point. An interesting plan may result in an uninteresting figure, or an interesting section may result in an unusable plan, right? And so it really depends on your point of view. In 2009, I joined the University of Illinois at Chicago, where I had an opportunity to work with Professor Bob Somel, who, while not a postmodernist, really wanted to understand, once again, the rhetorics around postmodernism without necessarily thinking about the aesthetics of postmodernism, right? And in this exercise, I was, I guess, again, lucky for me, I was able to be in the room when a new discussion about Robert Venturi and Denise Scott Brown's work was being rehashed by Bob Somel at the school at the time. Where here, if you're familiar with Robert Venturi and Denise Scott Brown's contribution of talking about a duck versus a decorated shed, here, a duck, the shape of a duck is literally declaring itself, right? Semiotically proclaiming what it's doing and communicating on the behalf of the human as though the section of the building is language. The building is language, right? It's saying what it does because this building of a duck is actually selling poultry and it's literally exactly a duck in section. Around the same time, I have been thinking a lot about the work of John Haydock. These are some of the drawings by John Haydock, where he was, this is the project Victims, famous seminal work by Haydock. But then the difference between Venturi Scott Brown's duck, which is literally a duck, versus the victims of Haydock is that the mystery of Haydock's victims are not exactly anything. They simply carry the traits of things where you can perhaps make out characteristics of characters without declaring exactly what they are. And I love this mystery, right? I love this inexactness and this kind of non-literal relationship with the development of characters. Now, if in the ear pocket of this cat, if you're able to see a man with a beard, if you see it, then you, like me, carry this Homo sapien condition called pareidolia. What is pareidolia? The more we learn about the distinction between Homo sapiens and Neanderthals, is that Neanderthals, by the way, weren't their cranial capacity were bigger than ours. If anything, they were probably smarter than us. But what really sets us apart from Neanderthals is our ability to be social. We know who we can cooperate with and who we might want to run away from. We are able to read just from somebody's face whether or not this person is probably a friend or a foe. This is innate to our survival and success as a species, right? So much so that we project this condition onto rocks. We look at a pile of rocks, we not only see a face or a body, we even assign gender and character to a pile of rocks. Okay, I don't know if that is shocking to you, but it is shocking to me that we do this. These are inanimate objects that we assign characters to because of our deep-seated condition of pareidolia, right? It doesn't take much to complete the exercise of pareidolia or look for, it means that, whereas people may say, oh, but we're not necessarily all trained as, let's say, keen readers of formal analysis. I beg to differ. I believe we're born with it. We can totally read the nuance between, let's say, this facial, let's say, proportion and identify a mood. This is innate in all of us. It's also why, when Haydock introduces elements or clues, right? Like reading a mystery novel, if there are clues, or if the clues are not so literal or not so exact, I think this is a really fun exercise to dive into, at least, as a designer. But you might be asking at this point, this is interesting and everything about the condition of Homo sapien, but what does that have to do with architecture, right? You might be asking that. Louis Sullivan famously, when during the development of Chicago's School of Skyscrapers, proclaimed that the skyscraper is a tripartite stack. of a bottom, middle, and top. Bottom being an atrium, middle being a repeat of typical plans, and top something like a crown, right? And by the time in the late 1920s, when Adolf Loos competed in the Chicago Tribune competition, he took the tripartite stack almost satirically, literally, as a column with a base, shaft, capital, right? A tripartite stack. Base, shaft, capital, all three words etymologically related to the human anatomy, right? It is as though we're once again looking at the tripartite stack of a body, and it's consistently been in how we read buildings, right? And the posture of, for example, these three characters also produce a very visible body language. Here, the Greek kouros is, let's say, cordially standing bilaterally, symmetrically stiff, as though it's a stiff and polite character. The famous Michelangelo David is performing a contrapposto where the shoulder line and the hip line are non-parallel to each other, performing a contrapposto, right? And here, Bernini's David is in full motion torque, right? And he's caught in the middle of an action. So we're talking about polite, relaxed, and intense, right? The body language is so visible once we break down the tripartite stack this way. And it's also why sometimes when I wonder, perhaps why I like this building so much, which is the Seattle Public Library, is that it too is also a tripartite stack performing contrapposto. And it's why maybe I find it so relaxing to see. I thought about this so much that I also produced a story. This is a story about a primitive person stalking a deer. He jumps on it, he thinks about it, jumps on it and kills a deer, right? Like slices the throat open, but he does not take the flesh. He simply takes the skin enthusiastically here. Fervorously unskins the deer, sews it back together into a cloak, covers himself under the cloak next to the naked deer. He takes this cloak, runs over to his companion and starts dancing, okay? And the concealment of the details of his body and his face and his body introduces this inexact mystery that becomes a bit of an abstract skyline. It's also why I believe if I conceal the faces, we can still read the body language. I just want to really emphasize this point, right? Like if I were to say, it's not what you're saying, but how you're saying it. If each and every one of the skylines that we're familiar with in themselves are sentences completed with the characters, right? I can't understate this because, some people are so proud of their skylines that they print it on a t-shirt or on a mug as a source of identity, right? You are where you're from graphically. And we are the people who eventually help, let's say, introduce how the sentences are said. And it's also why earlier in my career and even now, I've thought a lot about what does it mean for the body to be translated in a non-literal way, in an abstract way. If we were to translate the body geometrically, if we were to flip it around, right? If here, this is a project titled White Elephant, where you're able to flip it around. And if you do flip it around, and because of its non-equilateral proportions, does it become new characters based on its proportion each time you flip it, right? And it also translates into some of the more recent work. This is a birdhouse I designed for the Brooklyn Botanic Garden, titled "A Flock Without a Murder." A murder I guess talking about a murder of crows. Crows are so clever that some of the human constructions we've achieved a human to non-human semiotic relationship, right? We communicate with non-humans. Crows recognize, I guess, an abstract representation of a human body so that a scarecrow would be able to agriculturally deter the crows from entering, right? And so, what if we were to turn such a scarecrow into an abstract figure and also allow nooks and crannies for the would-be prey species that crows would eat from, right? Or in this project, for example, we had an opportunity to construct this installation in front of the City Hall. Here you may recognize this is the LA City Hall. we collaborated with a musician. So this cavity upstairs is a lot like a amplifier for guitar, and you can faintly make out that there's a speaker's box at the bottom. If you're familiar with the movie In the Mood for Love, and in the final sequence of that movie, In the Mood for Love, the protagonist whispers a sorrowful secret into a building and covers it with mud, right? Here, what we did was anything you say to this structure, the amplifier descrambles your voice. So whatever you say will become a secret. It becomes an unrecognizable utterance that you can say to the city, right? So the title of this piece was House of Words. And these are some of the moments from being underneath the House of Words. You know, like sometimes I think we all have this fear. We're our own worst critics, right? Sometimes I fear that what if I'm a pretty bad architect? But this was a moment of relief when I saw this. I was like, oh, okay, it's not that bad. And so a project where you know, this whole thing belongs to the larger collective of projects that I'm assembling into a book, an upcoming publication with Axiomatic Collections titled A Book of Monsters, right? As I mentioned before, I really want to think about what sets a character or creature apart from a monster. The same DC bid group also hired us. Again, I can't emphasize my sense of shock that we got paid money to do this. This is a AR/VR view of on Grand Avenue, and where we proposed a series of oversized buildings that would walk along the Grand Avenue. But maybe to talk more about the idea that posture is a structural problem, and this idea that an architecture can exude body language, right? Some years ago, as Ingelo mentioned, we were hired by Coachella to build one of their structures. This here is a piece titled The Tower of 12 Stories. I have a very, close friendship with a structural engineer named Matthew Melnick from Naus Engineering. Some of you may be familiar with this person. He's the best. By the way, if you ever get out there, just work with Matthew. He'll, you know, my first meeting with Matthew Melnick, structural engineer, okay? He asked me, is there something that's important to you? I said, I would like zero, there are 12 columns here, right? I would like 0 of the 12 columns to be perpendicular. I would like all of the columns to be crooked. As a structural engineer, when you hear that, you know, you must be, but you know, he loved it, right? Matthew loved it, and we turned this into a challenge. Because here, I'm gonna say something where once you see it, you'll never be able to unsee it. And I invite you to look forward to this for your next opportunities when you encounter either a Roman or a Renaissance sculpture. Here, this is Augustus Prima Porta, who's performing a mild case of contrapposto, right? You can see that the hip is slightly diagonal. And one hallmark structurally of someone performing contrapposto, because you know our bodies are also kind of like a structural problem, right? The load-bearing member, the primary load-bearing member is right here, this one leg. This other leg, as you can see with the toe, is not a primary load-bearing member. If anything, is acting as a kickstand. It's fine if it's bronze, because you know, as sheet metal, I think sheet metal is pretty tenacious. You can deal with compression and tension at the same time. But marble does not like being, I guess, in tension, right? Marble, I'll say it differently. Masonry construction does not like being in tension. Okay, it's also why this baby really matters. This baby is a third structural member hiding in plain sight. This is a kickstand, okay? In other words, we're looking at a tripod. This is a tripod. It's not a bipedal structure. It's a tripod, which is an extremely sturdy structural system. Now, next time you look for another Roman sculpture, sometimes they're somewhat creative about it, right? This is like Roman ingenuity. Sometimes it's a tree trunk. Sometimes it's a shirt. Sometimes it's a sword. It's always something. It's always something. There's always, if it's marble, there's a third structural member hiding in plain sight, semiotically disguised as, for example, a baby. It's also why we treated this problem as not 12 columns, but 4 tripods. Okay, this structural system as a work of contrapposto is 4 tripods, 4 structurally self-sufficient tripods that are tied onto each other. We call this unit over here the pelvic bone. The pelvic bone here is almost like a independent tabletop where we can use that tabletop to, I guess, contain all the wood frame bubbles above. Behold, here a horde of unstable beings emerge from the stable of instabilities. With whom must we adhere to the decree of normalcy? With no one. We, a horde of unstables, stumble our way through the gate of our stables. We stumble as we slouch, slump, stoop, hunch, loll, sag, and droop our way through the world. We lean because we have learned the way of the sass. We slouch because we have perfected the ways of the slumber. Join us as our immaculate metallic legs carry us. No tree trunks, no clothes, no swords, no babies. This was sort of a mission statement. I mean, lucky for us too, when Coachella first approached us, I guess the instruction was very simple. Can you do something visually striking and tall? And at the time, I had recently completed this drawing titled Cartoonish Metropolis, where I was thinking, what if we cannot find typical plants? What if it's impossible to have typical plants? And that, a section reveals a cluster of bubbles, rooms, individual to each other, in each person's use, right? And so we were, in some ways, trying to translate this drawing into a built form. And a couple of years ago, a Japanese developer asked us to propose some tall buildings. And I would say the Coachella lessons made it into our proposal too. This was also on built. There's a lot of that, by the way, for the students in the room.
Until you're 80.
Or 60, I'm not sure.
Well, it's.
Yeah, maybe.
He's projecting for himself.
I'm going to skip so this is the Venice Biennale, more of these kinds of characters, monsters. I feel like I've dwelled a little too long in this segment, so I'm going to start skipping things. This is another story about 3 kids graduating from.
Buy the book.
Oh. It's out of print, by the way. They're talking about what happens when you graduate kindergarten. What do you want to do when you grow up? They're describing where they want to live, what they want to do for a living, and realizing that they're about to say goodbye to each other. They assembled in their heads, the buildings that they talked about, where they'll live, where they'll work, into one aggregated, gigantic building, right? So that in their heads, they may not have to say goodbye. When we did the SF MoMA project, it was also one of these exercises where we're adding buildings to buildings, right? Adding systems to systems, but we also realized we were adding sensibilities to sensibilities, right? Like references and influences, some of which are quote unquote high art, but others of which are quote unquote pop art. Whereas once upon a time, I would have been really uncomfortable about the admixture of the two, or the collapse of the 2 ends of the spectrum. By the time we were kind of adding these references to references and flattening them, I would say this was a moment where posture was also evolving in our body of work. As I mentioned, by the time we get to the facts of fiction, I'm going to really try to speed up. The BC bid people, when we did the urban analysis for them, as I mentioned, it wasn't only during a time of COVID, but it was shortly after the murder of George Floyd, where people took it to the streets, right? People took it to the streets. I want to repeat this phrase, people took it to the streets, because infrastructurally here, we're looking at the Pershing Square, because I was in downtown and I remember people didn't use the Pershing Square. People took it to the streets around the Pershing Square, right? Meaning something that was designed to be a political or civic infrastructure was not used during a time of civic unrest. Instead, vehicular infrastructure had to double its duty as civic infrastructure, okay? Other forms of urban analysis that we want to tell our counterparts at DC BID was if there was an alarming drop of occupancy rate during COVID, where if it's healthy by 80% occupancy rate, we drop down to sometimes lower than 50 during COVID. But if we're to redistribute the solid void relationship in the form of let's say like lack of occupancy, and relook at the kind of let's say occupied massing of these buildings that we're so familiar with, what are some of the ways in which we can maybe creatively rethink the voids and maybe programmatically insert things that are not yet expected within these buildings, where we may see our buildings differently. This one you're already familiar with, because in some ways I think of these kinds of acts of cartoon, right? Especially when you think about the editorial segment of newspapers where you find political cartoon to be a form of journalism, a form of very biased journalism, right? And so, additionally, the facts and fictions of these things. This is a project titled Sociopaths, where a policeman is interviewing 3 suspects, a butler, a wife, and a classmate, about a murder of a person. And they each describe the events. And as they talk about the events, they each describe, by the way, they each confess to the same murder, right? And each of them described a totally different house. For example, the butler was describing his relationship with the backup house, or the wife was describing this intense jealousy from the husband, where every room was visible as an act of voyeurism by the husband, right? Or in the case of the classmate, he was describing this incredibly opulent interior that he was also jealous of financially. And they each described the act of murder, right? To the 2 detectives, they're so perplexed because surely 2, if not all 3 of them are lying. But then each time they lied, they described a completely different building. What came out of this is a work of fiction, but the facts that came out of it, though, surprisingly, as I mentioned before, sometimes we look at the graphic qualities and something else. In this case, proverbially, a bunch of spoons came out of it, right? Such as a couch, some side tables, a coat hanger in the form of a saint. I always thought it would be really funny if the halo was a coat hanger. Or carpets. Again, these are all graphic things that came out of the story. This is a rug that we did with Urban Fabric Rugs, titled "Shadows of Things We Wish We Had." As I mentioned, I'm gonna just fast forward all these. Actually, I'm not gonna fast forward this one. This one's good. Talking a bit more about the facts and fictions of things, and this is a work of let's just call it a political fiction, right? You see a man saying goodbye to his partner, packing and everything, getting onto a train and meeting a person, a scientist in a lab coat. And they get on this really long elevator ride. And to pass the time, they struck up a conversation about tall buildings inside of this elevator. And the scientist says, remember in 2009, when they completed the Burj Khalifa, which is 800 meters, people were asking, how high can we go? Where would it be? And what would it look like, right? So in this reality, the answer the question of how high can we go is answered by when we run out of air, which is roughly 12 kilometers, right? So this here, you can faintly make out the skyline of Manhattan, because this building is the extrusion of Central Park by 12 kilometers. It has roughly the capacity for 87 million people, which is the size of Germany, right? So unlike the Broadacre City spaceship, where it's a city inside of a building, this here is a state and a kind of economic and political entity, a state inside of a building, right? Where the figure ground of Manhattan is reversed. The zoning of this building has to be done in section, as well as housing typologies in section in order to correspond with cloud conditions. So they get to the top of the building and the scientist says, as you know, it is physically impossible to live here. So you are the experiment. Stay here for a year. If you survive, we'll keep building. He does survive. He comes home and he describes, he says, I promise, I kept my promise. I wrote every day, 365 letters. Did you get all my letters? And she says, yes. Some of the letters are beginning to really concern her. For example, this one letter, I guess he identified all the hours that he wasn't working and he painted it black. Right? And so she says, well, training is difficult, what's gotten into you? So monsters have gotten into him. He says, I've come to realize something very important. I want to be exceptional at what I love. So he has strategies in the head and geometries in the heart. And he developed this project called the Obsession Accelerator, where he built a box within a box, and he'll work all day and night around the box and sleep inside the box, which is a heartbreaking thing for her to hear. I had a box like this, right? This was my home. This was my box. This project is titled The Briefcase House, where I lived for almost 6 years. This is Helvetica, the cat who sadly passed away a few years ago. And this is the inside of the box. But outside of the box, this here is roughly the beginning of Bureau Spectacular, where some of the early design works were taking place. When the Briefcase House was completed, I had some friends over and they were asking, "Oh, cool! Did you just do architecture?" And my answer at the time, which I consistently say now, is no, I didn't just do architecture, because this thing is too small to be architecture, but too large to be furniture. A super furniture, a typology of its own scale, a super furniture. The scale of super furniture also became a mode of working for us. When we first got to Los Angeles, we had a chance to work on a retail store, which was a, let's say, jigsaw puzzle of super furniture pieces that we assemble into a staircase. Why a staircase? Because it becomes an audience space. People can sit on the staircase as bleacher, right? Or in this case, with Vox, the media company, we built an indoor treehouse. All right, I'm going to speed run the final segment, which is other current projects I'm working on, right? Skip this, skip. This is the current office in East LA, very close to here, by the way. You might be wondering, this is all like fiction, graphic novel, graphic design, industrial design, that's all great. Like, is this person even doing architecture, I'm happy to report that the answer is yes. We are doing architecture. This is a ground up residential project that we completed about a year and a half ago. It's a duplex in Bellflower. Yeah, duplex. The client was a neighbor who just kind of asked, yeah, can you draft something? Like, we just need a box, like a very basic box, right?
Be good, gatos.
And so I was thinking, wouldn't it be amazing if we were to take this challenge of doing a normal box seriously and think of the duplex as 4 strips, right? 2 private strips and 2 public strips. And if we were to take the deconstruction of the strips, as though we're thinking about cartoon strips, but deconstruct them also in elevation, right? If the interior elevation and the plan all got deconstructed into strips that you slot back together, right? Because what's more of a telltale sign of someone's way of life other than the interior elevation? That is truly a slice of life of how people are living and working. And this slotting back together wasn't just a way for us to find a kind of programmatic understanding of privacy and public, but also it became a structural system, right? A way for us to think about how this thing might want to get constructed. Where do we place the shared wet wall and all these things? Long story short, this thing did get completed. I have to say, the journey up to this point, I think I'm probably pretty okay with schematic design, probably somewhat okay with design development, but terrible at CA. Okay, I own up to this. I'm so bad at CA that the contractor or the client won't listen to me. So these are baby steps that we're also taking. It's Christine there in the back. It's done, and I think that we learned our lessons about construction administration, and hopefully the next one will be better. Additionally, we were also recently completed a project which was a adaptive reuse of sorts on Jefferson. This is a former warehouse that they were converting into a office space. And we took on primarily the facade interface between the corner parking and the inside outside thresholds, right? We're thinking, what if we were to take the facade and unroll it into, again, another strip of apertures, and some of the apertures would allow for, since parking is a requirement, but if we were to open it up large enough and propose it to be operable, what if people can treat this corner as though it's 1/4 of a courtyard, right? An L-shaped courtyard. So again, these are some of the images that came out of it. This third current project is something that I'm really, really excited about. It's another residential project. This project is titled Set Theory. For those of you who studied math at some point in your lives, you may be familiar with a diagram like this, where people talk about sets, right? A, B, just because the two things interact doesn't mean there's one result. As a matter of fact, we know there's a minimum of 16 results mathematically, right? And so what if we were to take, oh no, what if we were to take some, I don't know why this got skewed, it's too bad. What if we take some of these relationships of the superimpositions between geometry and think of ways to turn on, off, the almost like thinking of that programmatic Boolean operation, right? And also, as we're developing these more discursive drawings with the gallery in New York called A83, we were thinking, because I don't always sleep where I'm supposed to, or work where I'm supposed to, or eat where I'm supposed to. Because, programmatically, if you were to say, you sleep in the bedroom, you don't ever sleep on the couch, or you work in your office, you're never in bed, right? It's suggesting that programmatically, the color diagram is a solid color. The solid nature of the color is immovable. In the moment that you move it yourself, you're violating the social agreement, you're misbehaving in your own home. And since I don't do it, and I believe life is a mess, I also think the programmatic delineation should be a gradient, because life is a mess. I don't know why these renders got turned sideways, with drawings got turned sideways. These are some interior shots of the project. Another one that is current and recently got completed, we were approached by Art OMI, which is a organization in upstate New York, to build a temporary, like a 5 years installation art sculpture. But they were saying that they don't have enough budget. What can you do with $5,000, right? As I was driving out after visiting the site, this caught my attention. There's a precast septic company just about 10 minutes away from the site, right? What if I were to go and ask the owner of the precast septic company to give me their catalog, and so that I can do a monster out of the catalog? And what if we can stay within the budget? By the way, I also here work with Matthew Malnick, right? It's the same structural engineer as before, as Coachella. I had this cantilever that was pretty conservative, and he asked me to live a little. My structural engineer asked me to live a little. These are some of the things he said to me that I paraphrased. Again, I'm happy to report that this thing got done. It's just a bunch of septic tanks that we stacked into a let's say a character performing contrapposto, right? How? As you know, septic tanks, they come with these two tapered angles along the two sides because they're there to contain water, right? The moment that you rotate it, you also inherit this angle on the edges. And so the counterbalance of the angles gave us, I guess, we inherited the industry standard angles as the shoulder lines and the hip lines. So it looks precarious because we had to grapple with these kinds of industry standard angles. Not supposed to show this, but this is another project, another monster, let's say. It's going to be finished on December 15th. We just came here from visiting the construction progress. I don't have any photos of it, but it's what we're currently currently working on. This year, I'll also briefly go through, this is the thing that I'm most excited about in my office at the moment, right? We're working on a community center in Minnesota with a group from India, okay? Who are these people? They're from the Gujarat region of India. As you know, India is, the predominant religion is not Islam, right? Being a Muslim in India is being a minority. And they moved from India as a minority to Minnesota to become like a minority, okay? There are roughly 20 families in this region, in this part of Minnesota, and they bought this in like this building in an industrial part of Minnesota as their gathering space, as their prayer space. And they're at a capacity moment that they're thinking that need to double the square footage if they can, right? The thing that struck me the most once I started looking into their way of life, I want to turn your attention to this image, right? Particularly the ceiling plan. That grid on the ceiling plan, let's just call that the Minnesota grid. That is the taxpayer north-south grid, right? But this grid here, why did they do this? As one of the 5 pillars of being a Muslim is that you must pray in the direction of Mecca 5 times a day, right? This is the grid of God. They were looking for Mecca. And so the superimposition of the taxpayer grid and the grid of God is what really struck me when I looked into it. And so we proposed to them that, you know, we find Mecca, right? We just point this prayer box in the direction of Mecca, so they don't have to paint it again. They can just be inside of it. We're facing a lot of challenges right now. For example, parking requirements. There's also setback violations that we violated that we have to find a way to resolve. But what is not a problem anymore right now is because is the structural issues. We totally resolved that. Again, with the help of Matthew Melnick. I mentioned before, there's a Dutch philosopher that I work with. This is Timotheus Vermeulen. I'm finishing up, okay? This is Timotheus Vermeulen, who wrote the Metamodernism Manifesto. I've been working with him a lot on writing. Like, this is a writing project I'm working on right now with Timotheus Vermeulen. We already published an essay here about the effects of Zoom. For Timotheus, as a professor in media theory, anything that is on screen, he considers it a movie, including Zoom. Anything at all that is on screen is a movie, okay? It also means that, you know, geometrically, our relationship with each other, you know, is a kind of a point of 2 pyramids. What's our relationship with time anymore? You know, time, geography doesn't matter when you zoom. What's R1 anymore? You know, like in Los Angeles, in fact, you know, none of us are really supposed to do anything other than residential inside of an R1. But at the moment of emergency during COVID, all of us were violating this rule, right? All of us were performing some type of commercial activity inside of our homes the moment that we turn on Zoom. What does that mean to the, let's say, compartmentalization of sub-zones within the R1, for example? And also, what happens to your background? Like, I don't know why this is not showing up, but that's okay. Because I don't know if some of you have ever done this, where the moment you turn on Zoom, before the person speaks, you already judge them.
You can ask the people on Zoom if that's the case.
Yeah. You already judge them based on what's behind them. So no, we're really thinking of Zoom as a medium in itself, and so it's one of the books that I'm working on right now, and I'm working with Timotheus on it. Okay, this is the outro. Okay, this is the end. As I promised, I'm doing an outro. I'm just telling one story in the outro, and this one story is about One Wilshire. This is a real building in downtown Los Angeles, on I guess Grand and Wilshire, right? This building, it looks like an office building because it was originally designed as an office building by SOM in 1972. However, in the late 90s, it got converted into a, I guess, data center, right? It's now a data center. Architectural critic Vernalis once proclaimed where once upon a time, layers upon layers of humans processing paperwork, resulted in the need of an office space of floors upon floors of data, right? The moment we digitize it, this is I guess, the beginning of a building that looks like an office, but it's in fact a robot among us. One Wilshire is inside of the skyline of downtown Los Angeles, which is inside of this window. This window is inside of this room, which is inside of this model. This model is inside of a photo shoot, which is inside of this computer. This computer is inside of an office, which is inside of a file. This file is inside of a network of files, which is inside of a server. And the server is inside of a network of servers inside of One Wilshire. All right, thank you very much.